In this video, I will be discussing 4 possible roles of a coach. The first role a coach could be is a friend. A friend is someone who's there, who supports someone, listens to them, but can also have fun. Coaches and their athletes tend to spend a lot of time together, and when people spend a lot of time together, relationships can often develop through sharing different experiences. By the coach getting to understand their athletes on a more personal level, this can help with training, as they learn how the athlete works and therefore they can develop training strategies to get the best outcomes for them both. However, there must be clear set boundaries, and the athlete making progress should always be the priority. If there are no clear boundaries, then there can be breakdowns in communications and the training could become pushed to the side. Although having a stronger relationship can allow for communication to happen more easily, but when it comes to criticism in a friendship, people often shut it out and respond negatively to it. Like with any role, there are always times it's appropriate and times it's not. In team sports, such as football, if the coach has a friendship with each of the players, this could help to increase the cohesiveness, as everyone would have strong bonds. However, in sports that are more high risk, such as javelin, where someone is at risk of being seriously injured, having a more formal relationship will probably be required in order to keep everybody safe and not get distracted. The second possible role of a coach is being a manager. Being a manager is often needed a lot more in team sports. This is due to the fact that there are large numbers of things to organise. A manager's role is to organise things such as training and the activities in the session for the whole team or individuals, but they also sort out competitions or matches as well. So, for example, sorting out transport to fixtures, etc. The differences between a manager and a trainer are that a manager is the leader of everything within the team, whereas a trainer specifically focuses on the training and not the other aspects of sport. In order for a manager to be effective, they need to learn how each player and the team as a whole get motivated, so that when they are faced with setbacks, they can motivate them to carry on and try even harder. By doing this well, they should gain the respect of the players, which in turn will then increase the cohesion of the team and make them all a better unit. A manager of an individual athlete would be less intense, as they would just be focusing on one person, so it is important that a good bond is built between them, as there is nobody else in between to be a mediator. The manager's main aim should be to optimise the individual's performance. In lower level sport, it's much more likely that a team or individual would only have one person working with them, so they would be everything, for example, trainer or coach and the manager, so having a cohesive relationship is essential. However, in higher level sports, many coaches would be hired to focus on certain disciplines, so there wouldn't just be one person doing everything. For example, in a top university netball team, they would need an effective manager to ensure everything was organised effectively, but then they would also need separate trainers, for example. The third role a coach should be is a role model. A role model is somebody that people aspire to be like. It's important for a coach to be a good role model in sports so that their athletes learn the correct ways to behave and present themselves. If a team or individual has a good role model, it means they will look up to them and aspire to be like them, so in a way it will motivate the athletes to become better. For example, a football coach coaching primary school age children who is well informed about the sport and teaches the correct ways to behave will be a good role model. Being a role model also allows you to gain the respect of people much more. If the coach has the respect of their athletes, then it means they will work well together. Overall, if a coach is a good role model, it will influence people around them positively in their attitudes. For example, if a football coach teaches from the start of training that any dirty play will not be tolerated, then the players should learn that this is not appropriate. Whereas if a coach was not a good role model and allowed this sort of behaviour to take place, then that is automatically teaching those players wrong behaviours. And because a coach is senior to those players, they are likely to just continue the behaviour if they are not being told to stop. The fourth and final role that's possible for a coach is being a trainer. For a coach to be an effective trainer, they must be aware of the physical, technical, and tactical demands. For example, a top cross-country coach must know all the different components needed to allow for effective training for the athlete. They also need to be encouraging, because if there is no encouragement, then the performance engagement will be low. Engagement will also be low if there is no variety in the training sessions. If a hockey coach for 10-year-olds did the same session every time, then their pupils would become bored and lose interest altogether. Having the correct knowledge of the sport is also essential. They must know about the specific components of fitness that are needed, types of activities needed. Finally, they need to know their athletes and how they work in order to make the training sessions as effective as possible. We'll now compare and contrast within the roles. So for role 1 of a friend, like any role, there will be times a coach being a friend is appropriate and others where it is not. For example, men's football teams with ages ranging from 18 to 30 with a 35-year-old coach. This would be an appropriate scenario for the coach to be a friend. They are of a similar age and all of the same gender, and these two things can often complicate situations if there are dramatic differences. In the football environment, there is often a lot of socialising outside of training or competing, so for a coach to be friends with the team would be seen as normal. By having a tight bond with his teammates, it allows him to find out more about them, which in turn allows him to help coach as well, as he will learn how they work together or individually. However, when the age gap tends to get larger, this is where things can be seen as inappropriate. For example, a male dance teacher teaching 5-year-old girls ballet. As legally, there are a lot more issues and barriers when it comes to working with children. For the teacher to have a really friendly relationship with a pupil, it could come across as inappropriate. Friends often share physical contact, but for there to be large amounts of contact between a 5-year-old and a fully grown man, who is a teacher or coach to them, could cause some issues. In this case, as the teacher is male, he is teaching girls. That would make the idea of too much physical contact very inappropriate, especially if it was contact that was not needed. When it comes to adults teaching and coaching children, a more formal manner is required to keep it appropriate, so being a friend would not be appropriate. For the second role of a manager, being an effective manager would be very important when coaching an under-18s men's football team. It would be important to create a good team dynamic to avoid things such as confrontation. When teams are high in standard, and things can often get more heated as it gets more intense. So by having an effective manager, it would allow situations like this to be dealt with properly and allow them to work on the cause of the confrontation. Having a good manager in this scenario would also allow them to set goals for themselves and then be able to work towards them. By the manager being committed and giving their time, the team will gain more and more respect and therefore be willing to work with and for the manager. However, there are situations where such an intense management style is not needed due to the fact that the level of competitiveness is much lower and the standard is much lower. An example of this would be a 60-plus running club. Most of the individuals in this case would be attending the club to keep the baseline level of fitness, and also often for the social side. So here, a coach would not need to be such a manager, as all they need to be told is what their sessions are, and to inform them about any possible competitions or events they may want to take part in. As they are much older, there is not as much pressure on them to compete, so they don't need someone constantly telling them when they'll next be competing. It should be a more informal way of training that feels as if it's a leisurely task and not a commitment. Now looking at situations for a role model. Being a role model is always important, no matter who you are coaching. For example, a women's netball coach who always follows the correct practices would be a good role model. By following the correct practices, it will show the women the best way to behave. For example, being a role model could consist of, during a match, if a foul is played by one of her players that is missed, then she will bring it to attention. This shows that incorrect play should not be tolerated and teaches that it is okay to speak up if you use wrong play. However, for adults, being a role model is not always vital, as it would be expected that they should know by now the correct ways to behave during sport. On the other hand, being a role model to children is absolutely essential. For example, if a 5-year-old rugby coach was encouraging dirty play, this would not be effective. Children are the most impressionable, and if wrong play is being taught from this age, then it's much more likely that they will carry on these behaviours throughout their sporting career. If the incorrect play is the first thing you learn, then it is likely to be carried on, as the first ways we are taught to behave are usually behaviours we carry on throughout our lives. Finally, situations for the last role. So, of a trainer. If a coach has an injured player, they need to take extra care when training them. A striker on a football team has an injury to their hamstring and the session everyone else is doing would strain it, then they shouldn't be made to do the same session. The trainer is making somebody injured risk injuring themselves further. This will not be a positive way to train. They need to be given an alternative session to allow them to make a recovery quicker so that they get back on form. In contrast, if a child swimming trainer is changing the sessions around every week so there is more variety, this will ensure that there is much more engagement. Especially when working with younger people, this is much more important, as they are far more likely to get distracted if they are bored or underperform, and on the extreme end, stop the sport altogether. So that was my video on the roles of a coach.